Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to the Avexia webinar series. Tonight's topic is genetic testing for optimal health and wellness. My name is Robert LaCroix, and I am the Director of Marketing for Avexia Diagnostics and will be your moderator this evening. Now, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Wayne Sodano, our Director of Clinical Support and Education at Avexia Diagnostics. Additionally, Dr. Sodano is the Director of Integrated Medical Education for the College of Integrative Medicine and lectures and teaches internationally. I will now turn the webinar over to Dr. Sodano.
Okay, Robert, thank you so much and welcome everyone. So this is the main topic of this webinar tonight, and it's nutrigenomics. So what's that? That is personalized dietary recommendations. And as you'll find out about this test that we're going to talk about tonight, it's going to be beyond that as well. So you'll get all the little, you get all the ideas of what is going on to help your patient out. Just think of this whole night as a personalized treatment recommendations based on the patient's genes and genomics, and that's what we're going to talk about. But first, I want to mention the information you have on the slide there. First is genetics, and I'll go ahead and read that. The technical definition: the study of genes, genetic variations, heredity, and the inherited characteristics transferred from one generation to the next. So what's the deal with that? Here it is. All living organisms, they're going to utilize a system of information storage and transmission. And you know, that's contained in the genetic material. And that is what? That's the DNA. But by the way, over 99% of the human genome is identical in all humans. And what I mean by genome, that's that complete set of genes or genetic material. It's that other 1% that we're concerned with. That represents the broad variations of human traits, abilities, and disease risk. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Now remember, the genetic structure of an individual refers to what's known as the genotype, the genetic background, what the DNA looks like, what the possibilities are for genetic expression. That's the genotype. The other term that you may hear is a phenotype. That's the observable characteristics such as hair color or eye color, or even expression of enzymes or non-expression of certain enzymes. And we'll talk about that. So remember, just to sum up, the phenotype, that is defined as those observable characteristics of an individual resulting from the interaction of the genome, the genetic background of that person, with the environment and nutrition. And I always like to add the emotional component as well. All of those affect the DNA. In other words, the environmental toxins, think about those affecting the DNA, nutrients affecting the DNA, and also emotions as well, because they are certainly involved in genetic expression, excuse me on that. So anyway, so let's talk about the gene now. So as you probably all know, genes, they're made up of the DNA. That's that double helix that we all learned about in school, and that consists of those nucleic acids and those particular bases associated with those, and the bases are listed on the slide: the adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. Excuse me, yes, cytosine. And all together, they're going to form that genetic background. Now, a gene. Let's be real specific here. Thinking about a gene, I want you to think of a gene as this, that segment of the DNA that codes for the protein that's used to express that particular trait. And that could be also express an enzyme or protein. Now remember, an enzyme is a protein, and you're going to be seeing a lot of that on this test. And I'll be going over a whole bunch of genes and gene expression as well through these particular tests. So just hang in there with me. Now, the locus of the gene, or on the chromosome, you hear the term locus, and the locus, that's that location, or basically that's the email address that contains that genetic trait. And you may have looked up or done tests for celiac disease, and you'll get this information back, genetic testing I'm talking about, that says the HLA DQ2 or HLA DQ8. That's the locus or the location of that gene. So when you get that human leukocyte antigen, DQ2, DQ8, that's really what that means essentially. Now, I want to change gears a little bit and talk about what can happen with the sequence of genes when they change, right? And that's the genetic base sequence changing, and that's called, like you see on the slide there, a polymorphism. So a genetic polymorphism, change in that DNA sequence, right? That is among individuals or groups or populations, and that can be a result of either chance, as they say, or it can be the external factors Such things like viruses can do that, can cause polymorphisms, radiation can do that. But I want to be clear that not all polymorphisms are bad, because they can be an adaptive mechanism as well in the evolution of humans and animals and the like. So please keep that in mind. Now, the single nucleotide polymorphism, and it's termed a SNP, as you see on the slide, those are substitutions of one base for another. The adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. They start, and what will happen is you'll get a different expression of the DNA, or the genetic expression. And that's what's important, and that's what we're going to be reviewing tonight. Now, in regard to the SNPs, right, the SNPs will occur normally about 1 in every 300 DNA base pairs. And I know this is technical, but basically, to be classified as a SNP, it has to be present in at least 1% of the population. And please remember, above all, that SNPs may or may not have clinical significance. It's up to us as clinicians to decide, is that really important to that patient? That's where doing the history, doing basic blood testing is extremely important along with these SNPs. I'm talking about CBC, metabolic profile, looking at the iron panel, looking for anemia, looking for those kind of things. And when you marry these two together, you've got very large amount of powerful information to help your patient. So please keep that in mind. Now, a SNP, or that change in that base that I showed you before, that can cause a change in amino acid and the protein coding for that amino acid. In other words, it can change an enzyme to work or not, to not work properly. And the one you're probably familiar with is that methylene tetrahydrofolate gene. That's gotten a lot of copy in the last 15 years, the MTHFR gene. I'm sure you're familiar with that somewhere along the line. And that gene provides instructions for making an enzyme. And it's got a long name here. I don't have it on the slide, but it's methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. That's the gene that makes that particular enzyme. So why is that enzyme so important? The MTHRF enzyme. Well, that enzyme is important to a chemical reaction involving vitamin B9, which is known as folate. And if something messes up with that, right, it can cause all kinds of problems. It can cause increased homocysteine. It's also related to age-related hair loss, things that you wouldn't think about, hearing loss, alopecia, detoxification problems, and so forth. And by the way, this particular test we're going over tonight will look at that MTHRF gene as well. So very, very powerful. Now, here's just a quick look at, just a nice illustration of a DNA. And here's that double helix I talked about. These are the base pairs. They have them in different colors here. And there's one strand of DNA, another strand. Here is the bases, as you see here. And there's an A. Now, that A got substituted going down to a G, and the G got substituted to a T. So I think you got the idea. They're able to pick up these polymorphisms on the test, and that's what makes this a very, very powerful test. So the term genomics, I want to make sure you're familiar with that. That is, as it says on the slide, the interdisciplinary field of science focusing on the structure, function, and mapping of the genome. So what's the genome? That is the entire genetic profile of that individual. And they're taking a look at that as it relates to specific body functions, looking at those enzyme functions in particular. It can look at vitamins, and we'll be going over that tonight. So it's a whole gamut of things. Diet, looking at lactase, problems with lactase and so forth, lactose intolerance, I should say. So that's really what's going on here tonight. Very exciting. And that leads us to the term of what? Personalized genomics. You can look at the genetic background and make intelligent decisions and informed decisions about the patient's diet, stress level, type of exercise that they would mainly, mostly benefit from, their stress level. So really, really cool stuff when you get the history and do the basic laboratory tests, which I think are extremely helpful in this, this trifecta of information here. So that all leads to the topic of nutrigenomics, right? So now you got the genomics, you know what that is. Now, nutra, not a far stretch, right? So it says here, that's a field of science that shows how genes and nutrients interact with one another, which is known as epigenetics. So what I have here on the bottom is essentially nutrigenomics. That's a method by which food can cause gene expression. Bottom line, what happens is the food, or even environmental toxins, by the way, and emotions, they can all cause changes in DNA expression. Now, not the sequence of the DNA, but the DNA expression. And I want to read these two sentences that I have in here for you, just for clarification. First of all, the word epigenetics literally means in addition to changes in gene sequence. The term has evolved to include any process that alters gene activity, in other words, turns genes on and off without changing that DNA sequence. And it can lead to modifications that can be transmitted to the daughter cells. Think of the impact of having the proper nutrition, meaning proper diet, proper exercises, proper stress reduction on a mother or a person planning to become pregnant, because that's being transmitted to those daughter cells, and they know that it's being transmitted to the offspring as well. So pretty cool stuff. So epigenetics, that's that on the bottom. I'm just going to read that to you. That's emerging field of science that studies those heritable changes caused by activation and deactivation of the genes on and off without changing that sequence of DNA. So that's how powerful this information is about what food and diet, exercise, stress level, the whole mind, body, spirit connection. Very, very powerful. I also want to mention that there's another thing that's involved with nutrigenomics that I don't have on the slide, but I do want to share with you, is that the fields, all these fields are expanding, as you probably know. But now nutrigenomics, it's expanded to looking at nutritional factors that protect the DNA. And proper methylation protects the DNA. If an individual has low methylation, it's not working properly, it can expose the DNA to DNA damage, to potential for cancer, all kinds of strange things. And that's where nutrition comes in, becomes very, very impactful. And what happens is if you have the patient's proper nutrition, proper DNA, proper genetic expression, well, that's going to make for proper expression of these housekeeping genes, as they're so-called. And what do? They are involved in DNA repair, growth signaling. We have proper growth, proper cell death. We have cells in our body that have programmed cell death, like red blood cells. They live for about 120 days, then you get a new one. That's called apoptosis. And this is important information about having the proper nutrients or proper genetic expression of those housekeeping genes. So very important. So we're looking at personalized medicine, and that's what this test is all about that we're talking about tonight. Now, here are the 4 tests that I want to mention that Avexia Diagnostic is grateful to offer here. And here's the test: the Premium Health and Wellness Genetic Test, the NutriFit and Wellness Genetic Test, the Skin Health Genetic Test, and the Drug Sensitivity Pharmacogenetics, PGX, genetic test. I want to talk about that for a moment, that drug sensitivity test. This one's actually pretty cool, because that assesses how an individual will respond to medication based on their genetic background or their genetic makeup. And that can be an extremely important tool to avoid what's known as adverse drug reactions, which can be deadly. If you ever look that up on the internet, adverse drug reactions, there's a lot of people going in the hospital over the things per year over an adverse drug reaction in the United States. So let's take a look at the components of each of these tests that are offered here. First, this is the first one here. This is the Premium Health and Wellness Genetic Test. So where do you get back? The really cool thing is getting this one-page genetic summary back. It's going to tell you what are the appropriate nutrients, the fats, the carbohydrates, protein, vitamins, behavior, exercise, stress level for that particular patient. To me, this says it all in this one-page summary, and I'll get into the details. But this premium test is going to look at 51 genes. It's going to look at 60 SNPs, and there are 8 categories it's going to take a look at. And I'll show you a slide going over those 8 categories. And then you're going to get this really long, detailed, wonderful explanation, 26 plus pages, could be 30, that is actionable steps. What do you do? What are achievable? And you can share a lot of this with, and you probably should get a copy for your patient as well. So it's very, 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 very powerful. Next, I think this is the scaled down or a little bit similar test, but not as much on here as the premium test. This is a NutriFit test, the Health and Wellness Genetic Test, and that's still going to give you that one-page summary, which I'll be going over in detail. It's going to look at 23 genes, 25 SNPs, and then 4 categories, and then you're going to get a detailed report on better lifestyle choices and so forth right on the back end after the summary report. Now, the skin test, health test. This is quite amazing to take a look at this. This is the Skin Health and Genetic Test. It's going to take a look at individuals that may have an increased aging process where you need to get more antioxidants for skin health in there. And one thing I want you to remember, that the skin is an organ of detoxification. It does phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification, just like the liver and just like the gut does as well. So very important to get that information. And here it'll look at skin health. It'll look at 23 genes, 26 SNPs, and there's 4 categories, and you'll get a 15-page report on that as well for better lifestyle choices. Usually involves a lot of antioxidants as well with this, as you probably know, but great information. Now, this is the one I mentioned earlier, that drug sensitivity and pharmacogenetics test, and you're going to get a outlined genetic metabolic report on 450 over-the-counter prescription medications. And then it's going to go over 39 pages of information in these 12 distinct medication classifications, as it says on the slide. It's going to look at 19 genes and over 60 SNPs. This thing can be extremely important if your patients are on, medication, and a lot of them for chronic illness, they're probably on something. And I got to tell you, in my personal experience, it's a good idea to look up the medications that your patients are taking, because oftentimes not, a lot of the symptoms that they're coming in the office with is generally produced by those medications. If we restore health, and I know you all are into that, restore proper nutrition, proper diet, get the nutriture back up in the individual, stress levels down, weight level down, things of that nature up as needed, a lot of the medications can probably go away. So, and help restore their health. So this is a very exciting field. So I'm going to go over on the next couple slides here. We're going to go over just the one test, that the exhaustive one, the big one here. That's the premium health and wellness test. But I do want to mention that to get this test and get the results back, the sampling is pretty darn easy. You just do a cheek swab, get some DNA, send it in, and you're good to go, and you'll get all this information back. So here's what the one test looks like, the premium test. Those will give you an idea for the rest of them, but this is probably the one you're more than likely going to wind up, wanting to order. And there's looking at 60 unique genetic variations, the SNPs I talked about, on 51 different genes. Here are the categories that are outlined. It's going to look at macronutrients, fats, beverages, vitamins, supplements, behavior, exercise and activity, stress response, and this thing called the health awareness and effort score. I'll be going over that so you really can get an idea on what you're going to get back on these tests. Now, I want you to remember that looking at these genes, like it says right here, looking at the genetic testing, just to refresh your memory, that gene, that's that segment of DNA that codes for a protein that is used for a particular trait or expression. So keep that, please keep that in mind as we go through. Now, here's the fun slide. And on the next 2 slides, you're going to see that genetic summary. And this is where you get the most bang for your buck and really what's going on. They consolidate all of the looking at the alleles and looking at the DNA and the genes and so forth, which I will go over. But this is where you get a lot of bang for your buck on this slide, particularly if you're nutritionists or doctors that have nutritionists in their office. Very helpful. So first, let's break this down into categories. Here's your macronutrients. It's going to give you an idea. Now, this is a sample test result, of course. It's going to say, hey, about, and I'll just read this to you, 15% of protein. Your results reveal that your optimal health, 15% of your macronutrients should be from protein, and as you can see going down the line, 65% should be from carbohydrates, 20% of fats. Really good information. But where this gets technical is here, looking at these little warning signs here, or little caveats here. It's going to look at fats and say, okay, what's going on with the polyunsaturated fatty acids or the monounsaturated fatty acids from a genetic perspective here, looking at that DNA, looking at the genetic background again. That's what this is about. Now, as it reads here, your genotype shows a higher risk in the tendency to gain weight when consuming monounsaturated fatty acids. So what are those guys? Olive oil, peanut oil, sesame oil, safflower oil, even avocado. So you may want to advise your patient, genetically speaking, you may want to reduce those just a little bit. That may be adding to your weight gain, because you really don't process those or metabolize those as well as you should based on your genetic background. That's the information that you can supply. Looking at beverages here, look, lactose. Right, you may miss this lactose, but according to this, it says your genotype is associated with inability to fully digest sugar, right? Lactose, that's in milk. You all know about that. You can actually miss that, and the patient come in with bloating, signs of irritable bowel syndrome, things of that nature, cause increased intestinal permeability, increased thinking about, you may be thinking about food allergies or food sensitivities, and it may very well be a lactose intolerance or food intolerance causing this irritation in the bowel. Bingo, you got this information on this test because they do look for that. Next, your exercise, it goes through genetically what are probably the best exercises for your patient to do. One of my favorites here actually got a little warning on for this particular patient, is that injury and recovery rate, because it says your genotype shows your tendency for soft tissue injuries is high. In other words, you can advise the individual, look, you need to rest a little bit more. If you have somebody marathon running, and I used to be a marathon runner and certainly overtrained, I noticed when I slowed gave myself enough rest period time, I actually ran better, faster, better time, and wasn't sore after because I was overtraining. So that could be some really good information to give to your patient and see, yeah, and see how that works out. Now, the bottom part of this page is on the next slide. So let's take a look at the next slide. Certainly, it's going to go over vitamins, minerals, supplements based on genetic testing, behavior. And let's pick one or two out here. Here's vitamin D, and it says here, your genetic profile shows a tendency towards lower vitamin D concentration. So when you get that, it's a good idea. Hey, maybe I should do a blood test and take a look at vitamin D levels in this particular patient, look at vitamin E levels. That's where you want to go with some basic testing, which is extremely helpful. It also looks at genes based on behavior, food cravings, and taste. I'll just read one of these to you. Your genotype has shown an impairment in the ability to accurately trigger your satiety center. So what's that? Your fullness center. So these folks may have a tendency to overeat. So when you get that information, you make them certainly aware of that. So if they have a tendency to overeat, what would you do? If everything's okay, increase fiber for those individuals. Have them eat more fiber throughout the day. Get more sense of fullness, so you can personalize that diet. So I think you're getting the idea here. Over here is that health awareness and effort score. They rate all this stuff, put it in the computer, and then it spits out this thing 6.4. So what's that telling you about the individual here? So here's how they do the score rating. This score is a rating between 1 and 10. Now, 1 means a low level of awareness, and an effort level is required to maintain health. If you're at a 10, that means you really got to have a lot of awareness and a lot of effort to maintain health. So bottom line is, if you're a 1, you probably have an extra glass of wine. So that's just me, all right? But maybe that might not be a good thing for some other folks. But it means if you're at a 10, and this thing shows up at about a 10, you really need to make your patient aware of yourself. Look, you really need to focus. It's going to take a little extra effort, maybe a couple extra office visits to really explain this thing, get their diet, their exercise, and their mind, body, the stress level down, and really get them on their way, especially for these individuals with chronic illness. Now, this can also be used for individuals in the sports arena that are looking for sports performance as well. So we don't want to forget those individuals as well that really want to tweak their diet and get their exercise a little bit better, more prescribed on their genetic DNA. So you got both ends of this spectrum on this particular test, which is pretty cool. So the next slides, and there are a ton of them, and I'm not going to bore you going through every single slide, but I will. I'm going to move pretty fast through here, but this is the pages that I have left, just so you get an idea of how detailed this is. I had Chris, my buddy here, put these on the slides. He did a great job. So thank you so much again, Chris, to lay these slides out like he always does, and to get an idea of what the detailed information is about. So we're going to go over a few of these, but I'll go over every single page briefly so you get kind of an idea. Let's start with this one. So this is the overview after the summary page. So first, it's going to take a look at genetic weight, body mass index, and overall wellness. So let me read the recommendations to you, what you're going to see as a sample. So it says, your genetic profile shows that you have a tendency to burn calories at a typical rate. Next, this may make it more difficult for you to lose weight only using exercise. In other words, you got to include the diet on this individual. How they determine that is right here, and I'll slow down a little bit. Right? It says normal resting metabolic rate. So one major contributor to weight gain and loss is the metabolic rate of the individual. People with a higher resting metabolic rate will naturally burn more calories than others doing the same basic activities. This leads to lower average weight and slower weight gain. Here's how they figure that out. And this is the take home here. Individuals with the C allele, here's where they get here's the gene, by the way. Right? The trait that we're looking for, number 33, and it's all laid out for LEP, R, whatever it is, LEPR, and then it's got RS and all those numbers after that. It's looking at the alleles, CC, GC, or GG. Now, individuals with a C allele have an increased resting metabolic rate and can burn calories faster. This person came up as a GG. So what are the alleles, by the way? Remember that there's 23 pairs of chromosomes, so they're paired. You get one allele on one side, one allele on the other side. And these alleles are the chromosomes. They determine the hereditary characteristics, that is, hair color, eye color, and so forth. So when they look at, you get one from the mom, one from the dad. When they looked at this gene and looked at the alleles, the CC didn't show up, GC didn't show up, GG showed up. I said, okay, we have a normal resting metabolic rate. This individual's probably gonna have to work a little bit harder, do more dieting and stress reduction, again, to make, if they're looking to lose weight. So that's really what the take home is for the rest of this report. And they not only check one gene, they check several genes here. Again, looking for body mass index, body mass index. They're looking at the gene you saw on the page, the slide before. This gene, the MC4R gene. I don't have these memorized, by the way, so I just know that that's kind of what they're looking for. That they go through all of these genes. Anyway, so you're not looking at just one thing. You're looking at several genes, so you can get a picture of putting the puzzle together on the individual. So hopefully you got that picture. Here they're even looking at more genes for body mass index here. This one happens to be, most of them that you just saw were at a low risk. Now you got 3 of them or a higher risk and an increased risk and a higher risk. So this kind of goes back and forth. Notice that there's no C gene here. Okay. There's an increased body mass and higher risk for a higher body mass index here. So you'll do the math on that. That's where essentially that first page sums it up. So you can get, this is just going over details and details and details. So, and here's the details on the obesity. And I'm not going to read every single one to you, but I think you got the idea on the detailed report. So I want to go and look at the next one, the food choices here that you see here. It goes over fat. So let's go recommendations that came back. It says limit your total fat intake to no more than 30% of your daily caloric intake for optimal health. That can be a little bit difficult. People doing percentages, and I always found that that's where you want to prescribe when you have this. You give them a really good Mediterranean diet without the the wheat in it, gluten and all that kind of stuff. Generally, if you find a good diet to give to them, and you can call in and I can recommend some diets that I use for my patients as well, that you're going to basically get that 30%, less than 30% of fat and the proper amount of protein. Just have a couple diets handy that will satisfy this. And I think percentages, for people to actually count percentages out, is going to be a little bit difficult. But this gives you that information, very important information. Again, looking at the genes here and looking at the alleles again. It's mentioned a limit. This is where that monounsaturated fatty acids that we were talking about, consume those, limit the consumption to avoid weight. That's how they figured that out, looking at this particular gene and the GG type. Says, okay, you need to kind of limit those. That's the olive oil, which I absolutely love, by the way, and avocado, things like that. Just decrease them a little bit as you formulate that personalized nutritional component. Now here it also looks at the genetic tendency for better low density lipoprotein, and it'll give you the correct amount of gene expression, whether it's good or bad, or if they have a tendency, so you can modify their diet as well. So I think you got the idea. Carbohydrates, kind of the same thing as fats. They're going to give you an idea of where your patient should be. We would probably do this anyway, to consume the majority of carbohydrates from complex carbohydrates. Fiber, fiber-rich vegetables, legumes, a lot of that is kind of common sense these days, doing that. They look at genes for taste sensation, which I found extremely interesting. I don't know other lab tests, or probably some out there that do, but this one does, which is really cool. So again, they're looking at the gene, and then they're looking at the alleles, like I said before, and they came up that there is a normal tendency to eat sweets. As this gene has been named the sweet tooth gene and is associated with a desire to consume more sugar. And it's likely that individuals with the T allele are less sensitive to the amount of sugar. In other words, they don't pick it up as well if they have a T on one of the alleles. In other words, they'll tend to eat more sugar to get more to be more satisfied. So you can kind of make them aware of that. That's where you might want to do, stuff like maybe stevia, things like that, that you can modify the diet. So that's really the take home with that, and more about information about sensitivity to bitter tasting foods. Now, bitter tasting foods are really good to eat before you start a meal, because what do? When the bitter touches the tongue, it causes the digestive juices to start flowing. So if you had this information, right, that there's increased sensitivity where individuals are avoiding bitter tasting foods, they may not be digesting properly or starting that whole flow of the hydrochloric acid in the stomach and pancreatic fluid going, things like that, because bitters will do that. That's one of the natural medicine treatments, herbal treatments certainly, is to give gentian and other type of bitters on the mouth to start the digestive food going. So the fluids going for proper digestion. Again, beverages, we had talked about that, looking at lactose. They talk about, is there a normal response to alcohol, so forth, and is there an intolerance to lactose, very important. Caffeine metabolism, they're going to take a look at that as well, with the alleles. Exercise. Now, endurance potential. Here's what came back on this patient. Your test results show that your endurance potential is average. You may not be genetically inclined to perform better in endurance-oriented exercises. Now, take all this kind of with a grain of salt. Find out what their exercise history is. And by the way, before prescribing an exercise program, it's a good idea to have an individual go through a physical examination. But then this can give you some kind of things that for endurance exercises, such as jogging and swimming, are still beneficial to your cardiovascular health. So you have some information, and you can tailor their exercise, which we all know we need to do exercise. It kind of goes without saying these days. Even if it's breathing exercise, it's something to get motivated here. Somehow I lost this. What happened here? Okay, here we go. Sorry, guys. Happens once every time. So, okay, where are we at here? Next slide. Okay, good. More. Okay, it's going to look at these genes again and the alleles for endurance, and also for aerobic performance. So you have to read through and make the call. Again, I defer back to that sheet, the initial sheet on that one sheet, the summary sheet, because pretty much everything is on there. This all gets into the details, but it's important to show you how in depth and how involved this wonderful test is. Power potential, again, looking at your test results so that your power potential is average, your genotype is associated with a slight enhancement of muscular power. I'll let you kind of do the rest. So it's very, very important here. Take a look at that muscle growth, looking at those genes. So it can get really detailed. And I'll look at it this way. If the patient wants detail, give them detail. If you want to start out with the basics, what's on there, I think that's good to really help get them motivated. Now, response to resistance training is done. Again, the genes, the alleles, I think you got it. Okay. This is the one that I found really interesting to take a look at, the injury and recovery. Like I said, that really kind of got me like, wow, I really want to I really would like to take a look at that on my patients, particularly the ones exercising that may be exercising too much or overtraining. And then the individual says, no, they're going to keep training. And I was in that mindset many years ago. More training was better, more and more, not realizing your body does need to recover to regenerate itself. And that's where these tests and basic testing, nutrient testing, can be extremely important to get the nutriture of the individual. So this gives you some really good information. And a lot of times we all may need to see hard copy data, even if we're told something verbally. When you see the hard copy data, it's very motivating to the individual to make a change. Oh my gosh, this is what picked up here. That makes sense now. So like when someone sees a lab test, so, oh, you could have told them, but if they see the lab test, they say, oh yeah, that's a great motivating factor. Keep that in mind. Again, health, exercise, and it gives you some recommendations based on genes. Again, you're gonna have to tailor that for the individual. Keep that in mind, but this gives you a great foundational information on that, about what to do, how to set up an exercise program for your patient. Looks at cholesterol levels, all right, type of diet, what's good. I think you guys got it by now. Blood pressures or any risk associated with increased blood pressure based on particular genes and also the alleles. Yes or no. So you have some good information on that. Behavior. This is kind of interesting on these genetic markers. I will admit these were new to me as I was reviewing the test. So I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. We'll definitely see how this pans out. It says your genotype has shown an impairment in ability to accurately trigger your satiety center. In other words, fullness. That's what they're looking at with these particular genes. These are the ones that were new to me that I didn't know that they were able to test for. And they may have been out a while. Maybe I just wasn't aware of it. But I think it's pretty cool to take a look at that as you add that into your treatment recommendations. Is there an increased risk for addictive behavior, so forth? So really, really good information. Stress response. Looking at the high stress resistance, they take a look at this particular gene that creates the enzyme. You may have heard of the catechol-O-methyltransferase enzyme. That's involved in dopamine, but this gene is also involved, the catechol-O-methyltransferase, in hormone regulation, which is not mentioned on here, but I know that from doing this so many years, particularly with estrogen metabolism and metabolites. So this is kind of cool to kind of take a look at that as well. A little extra information. Again, more how the patient would respond to stress, long-term stress. I think you got it. Stress and hypertension. So there's the alleles. Now it's going to look at your vitamins and minerals. Again, all this is on that one page to make life easier. This is just a detailed report, so please don't feel overwhelmed. This is taking a look at vitamin A. Now, this says here that the genotype shows that you'll likely have the ability to convert plant-based vitamin A, which is not really vitamin A, it's beta carotene, right, to the active form of retinol, which is a vitamin A. So that means you have good ability. If it said you didn't, then you may need to get a little bit more vitamin A. Beta carotene is not getting converted in the body a whole lot, so that's where you would make that kind of decision. And if you're really not sure, go ahead and order a vitamin A test that I know we have at Avexia, so that's pretty cool. So it's going to look at B vitamins, folate, talked about that, and it's going to look at the right here, okay, ability to absorb B12, which is cool. Vitamin D, we mentioned that, looking at the alleles. For vitamin D, is there a tendency to have lower concentration of vitamin D just genetically? So it'll take a look at that. You definitely want to back that up with looking at the laboratory tests as well. Vitamin E, it'll take a look at that. Iron status, you definitely want to do an iron panel. Before you give iron, please, to anyone, have the benefit of doing an iron panel. Really take a look at that. There's a whole bunch of things that I won't get into tonight, but you really want to have the benefit of looking at an iron panel. It's extremely important. So that was the long version of that. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. But like I said, this is a bit more simpler than I made it looking at the detailed report. It's mainly on that one summary page. Believe it or not, all that stuff is on that one summary page. Then you can look at the details, educate yourself a little bit or a lot, and you can really formulate a wonderful exercise program, stress reduction program, diet for your patient as well, and potentially looking at and definitely order some of those other basic lab tests that are extremely important. Now, this is on this slide. I don't know if you're aware or not that Avexia has the Ask the Doctor, and that's me, and you can log in. If you have any questions, you can ask, particularly on laboratory tests. If you get these lab tests or this particular test, if you order this test, say, doc, I really don't understand what's going on here. Send it in, post it, and I'll have a look at it. So I'm going to turn everything over to Mr. Robert here, who's going to do the last few minutes of this to help you get started. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, doctor, we do have one question.
Sure.
It's kind of a long one, so just give me a second here. Does the DNA report also tell you which genes might have difficulty with detoxing certain vaccines?
No.
And okay. And do we have certain types of certifications to order? Do we have to have certain types of certifications to order DNA tests? And I guess because there's a follow-up, with the focus on 23andMe selling DNA data to third parties, will something like that happen with these tests?
Best thing to do, I don't have the answer for that, so I do apologize in advance. Let's see if you can get the individual that contacted that, and let me go ahead and find out and get back. Just to be, I want to make sure I give accurate information.
Okay. All right. We will do that.
I understand where that's coming from, and that's a great question.
Yes, 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 it is, because people want to know what's going on with their results.
Yeah, I'll directly find that out, so I get it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Doctor. We appreciate you going through this in this great detail. It was very informative. So if you're interested in ordering these panels, please log on to your Avexia account, click the test menu, click on Genetic Health. That calls out the specialty kit that you would like to try. Obviously, we went over just one. There are the other ones that we mentioned earlier. And then order the test that you wish to receive. And of course, to learn more about Avexia, we have all these different various ways. Um, Test-wise, definitely go on to Avexia Diagnostics. And we will be updating the website within the next week, where we're going to have on some of our specialty test kits a little bit more of a summary right on the website, on the front end of the website, that will actually help you explain to your patients what these tests are, and it's easily printable. It's just one page, so they can have a takeaway of what the test is they're about to go through, and you don't have to you can also download a big sample report, but at least give them just that little quick summary of what they can expect from the test. And that'll be coming out in the next week or so. And we will send out we'll send something out so that when it's up and running, so that you can also take advantage of that with your patients in the next week or so.
If you have any questions tonight, Rob, I'm just going to jump in here. Listen, everyone, that info at AvexiaDiagnostics.com. If you have a question about the test, or if you're not with Avexia, use that, and then it'll get to me somehow, and we'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you so much. We're good to go?
I think we are. Here's the thank you slide. We hope you found the webinar informative, and we look forward to supporting your functional health practice in the future. Thank you from Avexia Diagnostics. Good night, everybody.
Have a wonderful, peaceful night. Good night, everybody.